Musical notes are written on the staff as circles with or without stems. As you know, the placement of notes on the staff determines their pitches, basically whether the note is an A, B, C, D, and so on. So if we're writing music and we're in treble clef and we draw a circle on the G line, then that note is G. But there's a few things we can do to determine the length of the note. So I have my beautiful treble clef here, and let's just put a note right on the G line. And for fun, let's fill it in and give it a stem. This note is a quarter note. Now, oftentimes at the top of a piece of music, we'll have a marking that says something like quarter note equals 120 beats per minute. So there's 60 beats per minute, a beat being a second. So if quarter note equals 120 beats per minute, then one quarter note only lasts half a second. If we change it to quarter note equals 60 beats per minute, then the quarter note lasts 1 second exactly. So the tempo marking here has an effect on the note length. We will stick to 120 beats per minute. So right now, this quarter note is half a second. For fun, let's remove the filling, and this gives us a half note. A half note is double a quarter note. So right now this half note would be played for 1 second in length. So 2 quarter notes equals 1 half note. Now we can remove this stem altogether, and that just gives us a whole note. A whole note is double a half note, and it's 4 times a quarter note. So to review, this is a whole note, it's worth 2 half notes and 4 quarter notes. And it doesn't stop there. So let's add our stem back on and put a dot right next to this note. A dot adds half of the original note's value. So without the dot, we have a half note, which is equal to a second right now. If we add the dot, we're essentially just adding a quarter note to that value, so that gives us a second and a half. We can fill this in. That gives us a quarter note again, and then you add the dot, and it becomes a dotted quarter note, which is between a quarter note and a half note. And then we can get really fun with it. So for these next few notes, we're always going to have a filled in note head, always going to have a stem, and then we're going to add a tail to the stem. This tail halves the note's value. So now it's an eighth note, which is like a fourth of a second at this point. And then the cool thing is you can keep adding stems and it'll have the previous note's value, the previous note being an eighth note. So now we have a 16th note, which is really short. You can just keep going. You can put as many tails on there as you wish. So if you want to have a bunch of eighth notes in a row, it looks kind of clunky to write them like this. So instead of having these tails, we make a line connecting them called a beam. And then if I want these to be 16th notes instead of eighth notes, I just add another beam. And you can keep adding those as well. And yes, you can also take an eighth note, add a dot to the right of it, and it'll become a dotted eighth note. And so long as you have something that's less than a quarter note, a dotted eighth note, and a 16th note, you can beam them. So to make a dotted eighth and a 16th note, we put a dot right next to the eighth note, and then we put a beam on the side of the 16th note. So this is the same as writing this. It's also important in music to specify when to rest or not play anything. So let's say we're playing for a bit, and then we want to stop playing. We can make a rest marking to specify silence. So one of the markings that we use to specify rest is a whole rest. So this whole rest is a rectangle that hangs below the second line from the top of the staff. But instead of making sound, it's just silence. What's confusing is this is a half rest. So a half rest sits on top of the middle line of the staff, and it's equivalent to a half note. So they look very similar, but they sit on different lines, and a whole rest is double a half rest. Just drew a little face there. And they say music theory isn't fun. This is vaguely terrifying, actually. A quarter rest looks something like this. I'm not very good at drawing them. And then with an eighth rest, you basically just make this kind of squiggly thing. Again, not great at drawing them. And then to make it shorter, you add more tails, just like we did with the 8th notes and 16th notes. And yes, you can also add dots to your rests, and it will give you half of the original rest's value. Just as a kind of review, here we have a quarter note, built-in note head, straight stem with no tail. A half note, still have the stem, but the note head's not filled in. A quarter rest, it's equivalent to a quarter note, but it's just silence instead of a note. There's a beam here connecting 3 notes, and then another beam connecting 2 notes. So 2 beams, or 2 tails, means 16th notes. So we have 2 16th notes, and then this one just has 1 beam, so it's an 8th note. And then here, not filled in, no stem, that's a whole note. So that's that. There are plenty of places online where you can practice those things, and I also have a practice video.